The screen lit up again, casting a harsh white rectangle of light against the dark velvet of my clutch. I stood on the open lanai of a resort on the Kona coast. Warm trade winds pulled at the hem of my emerald gown, carrying the scent of crushed plumeria and sea salt from the black sand beach below. In my left hand, I held an obsidian glass award, its weight grounding and cool against my palm. In my right hand, I held a phone that had not stopped vibrating for 47 minutes. 40 missed calls. I watched the notifications stack on the lock screen the way a bookkeeper reads a deficit. 1 call from my mother Elaine. 39 calls from my father Howard. Howard Larson is a man who measures his words carefully when he wants them to draw blood. Exactly 3 weeks prior, standing in the hot afternoon sun of my childhood driveway in Oahu, he looked me in the eye and delivered his verdict. I had just handed him the heavy cardstock invitation to the gala honoring my life's work. He did not even open the envelope. He just tapped the gold foil seal against his thumb and handed it back. "We are busy that night, Joanne," he said. "Tiffany is hosting her boutique opening in Waikiki. Family supports family." I stood there smelling the cut grass and the exhaust from a neighbor's truck, feeling the familiar tightening in my throat. I told him this was not just a dinner. It was a patent buyout. It was the culmination of my entire career. My mother Elaine stepped out onto the porch, adjusting her sunglasses. She sighed the heavy, weary sigh she reserved for whenever I failed to read the family script. "Oh, Joanne, stop making a fuss. It is just playing with seaweed. Your sister has real investors coming. She needs us there, and she needs you to cover the table deposit." When I told them no, for the first time in 32 years, the silence hung in the humid air like a physical weight. My father leaned in close. He did not raise his voice, he just surgically dismantled my worth. "We will never show up there with you. It would embarrass the whole family. You are a disgrace, Joanne. Selfish to the bone." I remember looking at my mother, expecting her to intervene to soften the blow. Instead, she just turned and walked back inside the house, leaving me standing on the scorching pavement. For 32 years, I had operated under a quiet, unspoken contract. I fixed their appliances, I paid their property tax shortages, I absorbed the background anxiety of our household so they could focus all their light on Tiffany. I believed that if I just proved my utility, if I just funded enough of their emergencies, they would eventually offer me a seat at their table. But standing in that driveway, I realized the terrible truth of being the reliable daughter. They do not want you at the table. They just want you to keep paying for the meal. Welcome back to Zara Told Stories, where quiet daughters finally hand the check back to the people who racked it up. If you have ever been your family's personal ATM, the one expected to fix the leaks, absorb the costs, and stand in the shadows while somebody else gets the spotlight, pull up a chair. How old are you right now? And how old were you when you realized your family was charging you rent for their love? Drop your age in the comments and hit subscribe because you are going to want to see how this particular ledger gets balanced. I did not answer the 39th call, and I did not answer the 40th. I just stood there on the lanai listening to the Pacific Ocean crash against the volcanic cliffs, feeling a strange, hollow peace settle in my chest. What I did to earn that frantic digital barrage did not involve screaming across a dinner table. It did not involve tears or thrown glasses or desperate pleading text messages. It involved a live television broadcast, a single blue folder of printed lease agreements, and a calculated financial pivot that left my parents and my sister sitting at a white tablecloth restaurant in Waikiki staring at a dinner check they could not afford to pay. The central question tonight is not why I walked away. The question is why a father who proudly threw his daughter out of the family narrative was now desperately trying to dial her back in right at the exact moment the rest of the world decided to hand her a microphone. To understand the 40 missed calls, the blue folder, and the live broadcast that shattered my family's delusion, you have to look at the geography of how I was raised. Hawaii is a place of sharp environmental contrasts. Tourists see the glossy postcards featuring manicured resorts, endless pristine horizons, and sipping drinks out of pineapples. But locals understand the uncompromising geology underneath. My sister Tiffany is the Waikiki sunset. She is 28 years old, living a meticulously curated influencer lifestyle built entirely on pastel aesthetics and relentless parental subsidies. Her social media feed is an endless scrolling highlight reel of infinity pools, matching designer swimwear, luxury catamarans cutting through turquoise water, and sponsored posts for expensive coconut water that she never actually drinks. She is the version of paradise my parents love to showcase to their friends. She is vibrant, expensive, and requiring constant high-level maintenance. I am the volcanic rock. I work as an oceanographic tech developer out of a non-air-conditioned corrugated metal warehouse near Pearl Harbor. While Tiffany sips overpriced cocktails in shaded cabanas, I spend my days under humming fluorescent lights, smelling like saltwater ozone and industrial algae vats. My hands are usually stained green with kelp extract, and my work boots are forever damp. I spent my life being durable, ignored, and expected to bear the weight of whatever the tide dragged in. Volcanic rock does not get photographed for glossy brochures. It just quietly holds the island together, taking the impact of the waves so the shoreline does not collapse. In our family, the distribution of resources was never a secret. It was a proudly stated philosophy. Howard and Elaine Larson believed that Tiffany required an active financial investment because her beauty was fragile and needed cultivating. My parents funded her upscale downtown apartments, her imported cars, her endless brand launches that always fizzled out after 6 months of expensive parties. I, on the other hand, was the smart one, the capable one, the one who did not need hand-holding or cheering sections. That is a dangerous compliment to receive as a child. It sounds like praise, but it is actually a disguised invoice. Because I was capable, I was assigned the role of the family's safety net. I paid their property tax when they mysteriously came up short in November. I replaced the refrigerator when the compressor died days before a holiday. I paid for Elaine to have emergency dental work, only to watch her return with cosmetic veneers, boasting about her new smile to her friends. I did it all quietly, without asking for a thank you, because I thought reliability was a currency I could exchange for genuine affection. I thought if I just solved enough tangible problems, they would finally look at me the way they looked at her. That particular delusion started when I was 14. It was a heavy, humid Tuesday in April. I had just walked 2 miles home from the regional science fair carrying my very first award. It was a cheap plastic trophy, molded to look like a generic atom painted in chipping gold. To me, it was undeniable proof that I existed and that my mind had value. I set it carefully on the edge of the kitchen island, waiting for my parents to come home. I wanted to see my father look at it. I wanted him to see me standing next to it, proud and accomplished. The front door flew open. Howard barged in, sweating and frantic, carrying a garment bag the size of a small tent. Inside was Tiffany's new, custom beaded gown for the Miss Oahu Junior pageant. It cost more than our mortgage payment. My father swung the heavy canvas bag around the corner of the kitchen, rushing toward the hallway. The thick metal hanger caught the edge of the island. I heard the snap before I registered what happened. The heavy zipper swept across the counter, sending my plastic atom crashing onto the ceramic tile floor. It fractured into 3 sharp, jagged pieces, sending shards of cheap gold plastic skittering under the stove. My father did not drop the dress. He barely paused his stride. He looked down at the broken pieces, looked at me standing there with my hands empty, and exhaled a sharp, irritated breath. He told me to clean up the mess before somebody stepped on it and ruined their shoes. He said I should have known better than to leave junk in the walkway when we had an important pageant weekend coming up. He walked down the hall to deliver the dress to my sister. He never apologized. Neither did my mother when she came home 20 minutes later and stepped right over the dustpan I was holding. I knelt on the floor, sweeping up the fragments of my achievement, while they discussed Tiffany's hair and makeup schedule in the next room. That was the day I learned the rigid hierarchy of our household. Tiffany's performances were non-negotiable events. My achievements were simply junk in the walkway. An inconvenience to be cleared aside. You do not unlearn that kind of lesson easily. I spent my entire 20s trying to tape that plastic atom back together, trying to prove I was worth the floor space I occupied. I went to a local state college on a full academic ride so I would not burden them with tuition fees. I started working in the marine biology sector, securing research grants, running logistics and managing the unglamorous back end of ocean conservation. I kept my head down, my bank accounts organized, and my credit score high. I became so hyper-independent that I learned to shield my own administrative assets early. A few years ago, I quietly set up a secure, encrypted secondary email address and established a separate legal entity purely for trust and estate planning. I told myself it was just standard adult behavior, a smart move for a growing professional. The truth was, I knew my parents would eventually try to drain whatever reservoir I managed to build. I needed a vault they could not access, a place where my future was safe from their constant demands. Yet despite all those invisible defenses, I still craved their validation. I still answered the phone when they needed a quick loan to float them through a bad month. I still showed up on my rare days off to fix their router, scrub their gutters, and balance their checkbook. The reliable daughter is a captive audience. You keep paying the subscription fee because you are terrified of what happens if the screen goes dark. You endure the slights because the alternative is admitting that the love you are working so hard to earn was never actually on the market. I would have kept paying that emotional rent forever if the stakes had not shifted. But working in that humid Pearl Harbor warehouse, I developed something that could not be swept into a dustpan. I created a kelp-based bioplastic designed to replace commercial shipping packaging. It was a quiet project, born out of late nights and endless testing, and when a major international ecotech conglomerate decided to acquire my patent, the quiet, steady world I had built collided with my parents' insatiable need to fund my sister. The bank of the reliable daughter was about to face a withdrawal request I could not fulfill. I spent 5 grueling years staring into microscopes, documenting cellular breakdown rates, and logging 16-hour shifts while my peers were out surfing or hiking the ridgelines. I sacrificed sleep, relationships, and any semblance of a social life to perfect a formula that nobody thought was possible. The shipping industry produces millions of tons of synthetic waste every year, choking the oceans and wrapping the Pacific in a suffocating layer of indestructible garbage. My mandate was simple: create something durable enough to protect cargo across turbulent waters, but designed to completely dissolve once its purpose was served, leaving behind zero toxicity. It was a poetic assignment. I spent my days engineering a compound that would break down harmful elements before they could poison the environment. I did not realize I was writing the exact blueprint I needed to survive my own family. The breakthrough happened on a Tuesday. The patent cleared on a Thursday. By the end of the month, a multinational ecotech conglomerate finalized the acquisition of my kelp-based bioplastic. They did not just buy the patent. They bought the entire application process, securing the rights for global distribution. It was the kind of industry disruption that makes careers permanent and changes tax brackets overnight. To mark the acquisition, the conglomerate scheduled a massive gala on the Kona coast. It was to be broadcast live across local Hawaiian networks and streamed to their global investors. I was named the sole recipient of their annual Innovation Award. I received a heavy cream envelope with my name pressed in gold foil, holding 3 VIP tickets, 1 for me, 2 for the people I still desperately wanted to make proud. I drove from the industrial district out toward my parents' upscale neighborhood with the windows down, letting the heavy tropical air fill the car. My chest hummed with a fragile, nervous energy. For the first time in my life, I was not arriving to fix a broken water heater or drop off a check to cover a delinquent utility bill. I was arriving as a guest of honor. The winding suburban roads were lined with vibrant hibiscus and tall, swaying palms, a stark contrast to the sterile laboratory where I had spent my youth. I walked up the familiar manicured driveway, clutching the cream envelope like a shield. I found Howard and Elaine on the back patio. The ceiling fan churned the humid air above them. My mother was scrolling through a tablet, while my father nursed a glass of iced tea. I placed the invitation on the patio table right between them. I kept my voice steady, outlining the buyout, the televised ceremony, and the sheer scale of what had just happened. Elaine glanced at the gold foil seal. She did not pick the envelope up. Instead, she sighed, adjusting her posture in the wicker chair. "That is nice, Joanne," she murmured, her eyes returning to the screen of her tablet. "But, we do not really understand all that science stuff. It sounds like you are just playing in the seaweed again." Playing in the seaweed. A multi-million-dollar patent acquisition dismissed in 5 seconds flat. Before I could process the insult, Howard leaned forward, placing his iced tea on a slate coaster. He folded his hands on the glass table. The physical shift signaled that my brief allotted time in the spotlight had expired. The conversation was officially redirecting to the only topic that ever mattered in our household. "I am glad you are getting a bonus from your little project, Joanne," he said, his voice adopting the serious, authoritative tone he used for business. "Because your sister is in a tight spot, and she needs you to step up." Tiffany had launched a luxury swimwear boutique in a high-rent district of Honolulu 2 years prior. It was a predictably disastrous venture, fueled by expensive launch parties, champagne fountains, imported marble fixtures, and zero actual retail strategy. The inventory consisted of impractical bikinis priced for celebrities. The foot traffic was non-existent because she refused to open the doors before noon, claiming she needed her mornings for wellness routines. The business was bleeding cash at an alarming rate. Howard pulled a thick stack of stapled documents from a manila folder resting on the chair beside him. He pushed the stack across the glass table, covering my gala invitation entirely. "The boutique is going through a rough patch," he explained smoothly. "Tiffany needs a bridge loan to rebrand and get through the tourist season. It is a commercial note. The bank requires a cosigner with liquid assets and a pristine credit history. Since you are getting this payout from your seaweed thing, you are going to sign as her guarantor." I stared at the loan documents. The principal amount was staggering. It was enough to buy a modest house outright. He was not asking for a small favor. He was demanding I attach my newly secured financial independence to a sinking ship helmed by a captain who spent her days taking selfies on rented yachts. "Dad, I cannot co-sign a commercial loan for a failing retail store," I said, keeping my voice meticulously calm. "That is financial suicide. If she defaults, the bank takes everything I just earned. I will lose the capital I need to fund my next research phase." My mother dropped her tablet onto her lap. Her mouth formed a tight, angry line. "You are always so negative about your sister," Elaine snapped. "Tiffany is a visionary. She takes risks. You sit in a warehouse all day collecting a steady paycheck doing math. You have no idea what it takes to build a lifestyle brand. She is family, Joanne. You should be honored to leverage your little bonus to help her succeed. It is the least you can do after all the stress you put us through hiding away in that lab for years." I looked at Howard. I asked him if they were still going to attend my award ceremony. My father looked at me with a cold, unblinking stare. He tapped a thick, blunt finger against the bank paperwork. "We are dealing with a real crisis right now," he said. "Tiffany is stressed out of her mind. We are not going to put on fancy clothes and clap for you at some little science dinner while your sister loses her livelihood. If you want us there, you need to show that you care about this family. Sign the papers, Joanne. Support your sister. Then we can talk about attending your party." The arithmetic of the reliable daughter was laid bare on the patio table. I was required to forfeit my own future in order to purchase their presents. The gala ticket was a ransom note. If I wanted my parents to put on formal wear and acknowledge my existence for one evening, I had to legally bind myself to my sister's catastrophic debt. I was expected to set my own house on fire simply to keep Tiffany's curated aesthetic warm. For 32 years, I would have signed. I would have grabbed a pen, swallowed the panic rising in my throat, and bound myself to a catastrophic financial commitment just to secure a smile from the man sitting across from me. I would have traded my security for the illusion of their love. But the oceanographic work had changed me. I had spent half a decade analyzing pressure depths, understanding exactly how much weight a structure could take before it imploded. I looked at the commercial loan agreement covering my gala invitation. I felt the familiar, heavy guilt pressing down on my chest. But underneath it, something new began to calcify. A cold, analytical boundary. I did not yell. I did not storm off the patio. I realized that arguing with them was useless because they were operating on a fundamentally different currency. They dealt in emotional manipulation. I dealt in facts. I reached out and pulled the thick stack of bank documents toward me. I squared the edges against the glass table. "If you want me to co-sign a loan of this magnitude," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral, "I need to conduct due diligence. Send me Tiffany's complete business financials, the current ledgers, the profit and loss statements, and the original funding documents. I need to assess the risk before I attach my name to her debt." Howard relaxed, sitting back in his wicker chair. He offered a small, satisfied nod, assuming I was falling right back into my designated role. He promised to email the files that evening. He told me I was finally acting like a supportive sister. He had no idea that he had just handed me the shovel I would use to bury their entire false narrative. I did not want the financials to save Tiffany. I wanted the financials because a bookkeeper never accepts a deficit without checking the receipts. And what I found buried in those ledgers the very next day would turn a lifetime of emotional neglect into an unforgivable financial crime. The email from my father arrived at exactly 8 in the morning the following day. Howard rarely acts with such efficiency, unless there is a check waiting for him at the finish line. I sat at my battered steel desk in the Pearl Harbor warehouse. The industrial fan rattled in the corner, pushing warm, damp air across my workstation. Outside the rusted window, a cargo ship blew its horn, echoing across the harbor. I clicked open the attached files. To understand what I was looking for, you have to understand what I lost 2 years ago. At 30 years old, I had finally saved enough for a down payment on a small 2-bedroom condo in Eva Beach. It was nothing glamorous, just a quiet space with a sliver of an ocean view and a kitchen that belonged entirely to me. I had already collected paint swatches. I had mapped out where my drafting table would go near a window overlooking a small patch of palm trees. It was the first time I felt like I was anchoring myself to the island on my own terms. I had toured the unit, signed the preliminary paperwork, and prepared to wire the earnest money. The night before the transfer, my phone rang. It was Howard. His voice sounded remarkably fragile, a practiced tremor he rarely deployed. He told me he needed a specialized spinal procedure to correct a deteriorating disc. He claimed his insurance denied the claim, categorizing the surgery as elective. Without it, he said he would be in chronic pain, unable to walk unassisted within a year. He told me the out-of-pocket cost was $25,000. He wept on the phone. My strong, stoic father wept and told me he had nowhere else to turn. He swore he would pay me back in steady installments once his pension adjusted. I canceled the condo escrow the next morning. I drove to the bank and wired $25,000 directly into my parents' joint checking account. I watched the dream of my own home evaporate into the digital ether. I spent the next 2 years renting a cramped apartment over a noisy intersection, telling myself that a daughter's sacrifice is a noble thing. I convinced myself that saving my father from a wheelchair was worth the delay of my own independence. He never mentioned the repayment again. I never asked, because demanding money from a recovering man felt deeply cruel. Now, sitting in my laboratory 2 years later, I opened Tiffany's commercial boutique ledgers. My father expected me to quickly glance at the bottom line and sign the guarantor paperwork out of blind loyalty. He forgot that my entire career is built on analyzing data, isolating variables, and tracking molecular changes down to the microgram. I do not skim documents. I dissect them. The financial statements were a masterclass in retail incompetence. My sister had burned through capital with breathtaking speed. The spreadsheets revealed exorbitant line items for imported Italian marble countertops, velvet-covered display hangers, and a bespoke espresso machine for a fitting room that saw maybe 3 customers a week. The business was a hollow shell, propped up by high-interest vendor credit. But I was not looking for her operational failures. I was looking for the origin point. I scrolled back to the genesis of the company, searching for the initial capital injection that allowed a woman with zero income to secure a premium commercial lease in Honolulu. I clicked the tab labeled Year 1 Capitalization. My eyes scanned the rows of data dropping down to the earliest recorded entries. There it was, a line item categorized as initial seed money. The amount deposited was exactly $25,000. I looked at the transaction date, August 14th. I opened a new tab on my browser and logged into my own personal banking portal. I pulled up my archive of outbound wire transfers. I scrolled back 24 months. August 14th. A wire transfer of $25,000 sent to Howard and Elaine Larson. The industrial fan in the corner of the lab seemed to stop making sound. The heavy tropical heat vanished, replaced by a sudden dropping sensation in my chest. The betrayal felt like swallowing ice, freezing the breath in my throat. The 2 screens glowed side by side, reflecting the exact same date and the exact same dollar amount. It was an undeniable mathematical mirror. Howard did not have a deteriorating spine. He did not face a future in a wheelchair. He had engineered a phantom medical crisis, weaponizing my empathy and exploiting my inherent desire to be a good daughter. He stole the down payment for my first home so Tiffany could sign a commercial lease on a swimwear boutique. My parents had literally taken the roof over my head and converted it into Italian marble and velvet hangers for my sister. Every late night I had worked, every weekend I had skipped dinner with friends to save that money, was funneled directly into my sister's vanity project. People often assume that discovering a betrayal of this magnitude results in a cinematic breakdown. They picture smashed keyboards, thrown coffee mugs, and immediate furious phone calls. But discovering you are being financially farmed by your own blood does not cause an explosion. People often assume that discovering a betrayal of this magnitude results in a cinematic breakdown. They picture smashed keyboards, thrown coffee mugs, and immediate, furious phone calls. But discovering you are being financially farmed by your own blood does not cause an explosion. It causes a profound, chilling clarity. It is the moment the fog lifts and you finally see the exact dimensions of the cage you have been living in. If I had called them, screaming Howard would have immediately pivoted to defense. He would have called me. If I had called them screaming, Howard would have immediately pivoted to defense. He would have called me hysterical. Elaine would have accused me of being a drama queen, inventing conspiracies. They would have spun the narrative, claiming the money was a general family contribution and that I was attacking my sister's dream out of petty jealousy. The entire extended family would rally around Tiffany, painting her as the victim of her older sister's bitter rage. I did not touch my phone. I reached over to the heavy laser printer sitting on the edge of my desk. I hit print on the boutique ledger. I hit print on my own bank wire confirmation. I listened to the rhythmic mechanical hum as the machine fed the stark black and white proof into the output tray. I gathered the warm sheets of paper, aligning the edges with careful precision. I opened a desk drawer and pulled out a plain blue manila folder. I placed the receipts inside and closed the cover. The reliable daughter died right there at that metal desk. She was replaced by someone who understood that love in this family was a predatory loan, and I was declaring bankruptcy. I realized I held the ultimate leverage. They desperately needed me to co-sign the new commercial note because the $25,000 was gone and Tiffany was drowning in debt. They thought I was a naive workhorse, easily manipulated by guilt. They had no idea I was now an auditor, holding the receipts of their fraud. I picked up my phone to execute the first step of my exit strategy. My plan was to string them along, keeping them complacent while I secured my own upcoming windfall. But before my fingers could type a response to my father, a new notification popped onto my screen. It was a message from Tiffany, dropping into the main family group chat. She was not asking for a favor. She was announcing a sudden, unexpected event designed to sabotage the greatest night of my career. The financial betrayal was only the foundation. The psychological warfare was just beginning. My phone buzzed against the metal desk, sliding slightly on the smooth surface. The screen illuminated, casting a pale glow into the dim corners of my laboratory. It was a notification from the family group chat. Tiffany had sent a long paragraph, dripping with cocktail emojis and glittering stars. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cold steel, and read the message that was engineered to test the exact limits of my obedience. Tiffany announced she was hosting an exclusive VIP soft opening dinner for her rebranded swimwear boutique. She claimed her brand needed a high-profile networking event to attract top-tier investors. She had chosen an ultra-expensive Waikiki seafood establishment, renowned for its imported caviar and private oceanfront dining rooms. I stared at the screen as my eyes caught the date and time. She had booked the reservation for the exact same evening as my Ecotech Award Gala. The timing was not a coincidence. In our household, Tiffany possessed a predator's instinct for shifting the spotlight back to herself the moment the beam began to drift. She could not stand the thought of our parents getting dressed up to celebrate my environmental patent. She needed to overwrite my milestone with her own manufactured event. A second message arrived, this time from my mother. Elaine did not ask if I had conflicting plans. She did not mention my award ceremony. Her text was a masterclass in emotional extortion. She wrote that Tiffany was under immense pressure and needed her sister there for moral support. Elaine added that she had already invited 5 of Tiffany's most influential social media friends to help promote the boutique. Then came the true objective, hidden at the bottom of the paragraph. Elaine casually suggested that since I was receiving a generous payout from my little science project, I should cover the dinner check to demonstrate family unity. Family unity. I let those 2 words echo in the quiet laboratory. In the Larson family dictionary, unity was just a polite synonym for Joanne pays the bill. They wanted me to skip the defining moment of my professional career to sit at a table while 5 strangers took photos of their expensive entrees. Worse, they expected me to fund the charade. I imagined the tab for 8 people at a Michelin-starred Waikiki restaurant, ordering top-shelf wine and premium seafood towers. It would easily eclipse $2,000. I was expected to forfeit my global recognition in order to purchase the privilege of watching my parents celebrate my sister. This is the part of the story where you might expect me to send a furious reply. You might think I immediately unleashed my anger, exposing the stolen down payment and condemning their endless greed. But trauma bonds do not shatter all at once. They are woven into your nervous system over decades. Sitting in that humid room, smelling the faint odor of salt water and kelp, I felt the familiar, suffocating weight of my childhood conditioning press down on my chest. My hands began to sweat. A frantic, anxious drumbeat echoed in my ears. Part of me, the terrified, reliable daughter, wanted to cave. I stared at the keyboard on my screen, feeling the heavy gravitational pull of submission. It would be so easy to just type a reluctant agreement. Paying the restaurant bill would buy me temporary peace. Co-signing the commercial loan would keep my father from looking at me with that freezing, disappointed glare. For 32 years, I had survived by folding myself into a small, quiet shape and letting them extract whatever resources they needed. The thought of breaking that pattern felt like stepping off a cliff in the dark. I wondered if maybe I was overreacting. I wondered if keeping the peace was worth the financial drain just to avoid the agonizing pain of their rejection. I placed my thumbs over the digital keys, hovering on the edge of surrender. I typed a response. I kept the sentences short and devoid of emotion. I told the group chat that I understood the importance of the boutique launch. I typed the words they were waiting to read. Send me the loan paperwork. I will review the terms tonight. As for the VIP dinner, I will call the restaurant and put my credit card on file to cover the table. I hit send. I watched the little green bubble appear on the screen, locking my submission into the digital record. The reaction was instantaneous. The group chat lit up with a flurry of enthusiastic responses. Tiffany sent a string of crying happy faces calling me the best sister in the world. Elaine sent a generic heart emoji praising my sudden display of maturity. But the most telling response came from Howard. My father replied with a single sentence. I knew you would do the right thing, Joanne. His smugness radiated through the pixels. I could picture him sitting on his back patio sipping his iced tea, reveling in his victory. He believed he had successfully brought the runaway workhorse back into the stable. He assumed my environmental bonus was already secured in his pocket, ready to cover Tiffany's sprawling debt. They thought I had folded under the weight of their expectations. They thought the threat of their disapproval had crushed my resolve. I did not stop there. I needed to solidify the illusion. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the UPSCALE Waikiki restaurant. A polite hostess answered the line over the background murmur of clinking glass and soft jazz. I confirmed the reservation under my sister's name. I spoke with a steady, measured tone as I provided my credit card number, instructing the hostess to keep it on file for the entire evening. I explicitly authorized them to charge the final amount to my account, ensuring that my parents and sister would not even have to look at the check. The hostess thanked me for my generosity, noting that the VIP party would be treated with the utmost care. I hung up the phone. The trap was set. My family believed they had orchestrated a flawless victory. They were heading into the weekend, confident that they had isolated me, extracted my wealth, and preserved their hollow hierarchy. They thought I was sitting in my laboratory, defeated and compliant, quietly preparing to sign away my financial future. I leaned back in my steel chair and looked at the blue manila folder resting on the corner of my desk. I ran my fingertips over the smooth paper edge. I was not the terrified, reliable daughter anymore. I was an oceanographer who understood the exact pressure required to crush a hollow vessel. I had feigned submission to ensure they walked willingly into the deep water without a life vest. I agreed to their terms because I needed them to commit entirely to their lavish dinner plan. They thought they had won. But securing my credit card on their reservation was not an act of surrender. It was the final, necessary component of my exit strategy. My phone remained silent for the rest of the afternoon, lulling my parents into a false sense of security. They had no idea that I had just handed them the rope they would use to hang their own carefully curated reputation. The peace I had just bought them was temporary, and the actual bill was going to cost them everything. I just needed to wait for the sun to go down on the Kona coast before I delivered my final verdict. I let them sit in their manufactured victory for exactly 45 minutes. I needed them to marinate in the illusion of their absolute control. The air in my laboratory felt heavy and thick with the familiar scent of saline and kelp processing. I watched the digital clock on my computer monitor click past noon. Then I picked up my phone. I did not call the upscale restaurant to cancel the payment authorization. I opened my personal banking application instead and navigated to the security settings. I permanently disabled the credit card, marking it as stolen. The account froze instantly. The plastic rectangle they planned to swipe for their luxury seafood dinner was now effectively a useless piece of decorative plastic. Then I opened the family group chat. I typed slowly, ensuring every word was deliberate and stripped of any emotional pleading. I wrote that there had been a misunderstanding regarding my schedule. I stated clearly that I would be attending my own award gala on the Kona coast. I added a final brief sentence confirming that I would not be co-signing the commercial loan and that I would not be funding the VIP dinner in Waikiki. I hit send. The digital silence lasted for less than 30 seconds. The small green bubble sat there, looking incredibly tiny against the backdrop of my entire life. I knew exactly what was unfolding in my parents' pristine living room. I could picture my mother dropping her coffee cup. I could visualize Tiffany shrieking about her ruined evening and her humiliated influencer friends. And I knew Howard was standing up, his face darkening into a deep, terrifying red as he realized the family workhorse had just kicked down the stable door. My phone began to vibrate violently across the steel desk, rattling against a stack of petri dishes. The caller identification displayed my father's name. For a fraction of a second, the wounded 14-year-old girl inside me wanted to silence the device and hide under the desk. But the 32-year-old oceanographer picked it up and pressed the speaker button. Howard did not say hello. He did not ask for an explanation or demand a reason. His voice came through the speaker, dripping with a venom so pure it chilled the humid air in my workspace. He spoke in a low, measured cadence meant to inflict maximum psychological damage. "What kind of selfish, ungrateful monster are you?" he asked. I did not respond. I let him speak into the silence, letting his rage fill the laboratory. "You think you are so special with your little science project," he continued, his breathing heavy against the receiver. "You string your sister along, making her think she is supported, and then you pull the rug out from under her at the last possible minute. You only care about yourself. You have always been a cold, calculating disappointment." I listened to the man who raised me dismantle my character, piece by piece. This was the final punishment, meant to break my spirit and force me to apologize. "We will never show up there with you," he declared, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "It would embarrass the whole family. You are a family disgrace, Joanne. Do not call us. Do not come to the house. You are entirely on your own." The line went dead. The silence returned to the room, broken only by the steady, mechanical hum of the industrial fan. He had officially excommunicated me. In the architecture of a toxic household, isolation is the nuclear option. It is the ultimate weapon designed to terrify the scapegoat back into compliance. They assume that without their conditional approval, you will wither and fade away. They believe the fear of being abandoned will force you to crawl back, holding your wallet open, begging for a chance to earn their forgiveness. 5 minutes later, a text message arrived from my mother. Elaine rarely engaged in direct vocal conflict, preferring to deliver her strikes from a safe, readable distance. Her message was cold, calculated, and intended to twist the knife Howard had just planted in my chest. She wrote, "Family wealth stays with the family, who supports each other." I stared at those words on the glowing screen. It was a profound statement of their core philosophy. They viewed love as a financial transaction and loyalty as a localized economy where all dividends flowed directly to Tiffany. I placed my fingers on the glass screen and typed my reply. "I completely agree." I hit send. I sat back in my steel chair and waited for the familiar wave of devastation to wash over me. I waited for the tears. I waited for the crushing weight of rejection to collapse my lungs. It never came. I sat in my humid laboratory and checked my own vital signs. My hands were perfectly steady. My breathing was regular and deep. The tears that usually accompanied their harsh words simply did not exist. The threat of isolation had failed. When someone you have been desperately trying to please finally tells you that you are a disgrace, the burden of trying to be perfect simply vanishes. The invisible leash snaps. There is a profound, terrifying freedom in realizing that the worst thing they can do to you has already happened, and you are still breathing. I reached for the plain blue manila folder resting on the corner of my desk. I opened it, revealing the printed ledgers showing the fraudulent $25,000 medical debt and the matching seed money deposit for Tiffany's boutique. I reached into my bag and pulled out the heavy cream envelope containing my VIP gala tickets. I slid the pristine gold foil invitation right next to the damning financial receipts. The folder now contained both my past and my future. It held the undeniable proof of their theft and the key to my liberation. I closed the cover. I was no longer an emotional participant in their family drama. I was a corporate entity executing a hostile takeover of my own life. I began formulating a mathematically perfect exit strategy. I needed to ensure they walked into the Waikiki restaurant feeling entirely secure in their superiority. I needed them to order the most expensive items on the menu, assuming my frozen credit card was going to cover the bill, while I stood under the bright lights of the Kona coast. My plan was clinical and precise. I would focus entirely on my gala and let the trap spring itself and enjoy my hard-earned victory. But the universe has a funny way of testing your boundaries the exact moment you decide to erect them. Just as I was putting the blue folder into my secure briefcase, my computer monitor chimed with an incoming high-priority email. The notification banner flashed across the top of my screen, flagged with a stark red urgency marker. The sender was the legal department of the ecotech conglomerate that had just purchased my patent. I clicked the subject line. It read, "Urgent injunction filed regarding patent ownership." My heart gave a sudden hard kick against my ribs. I leaned in close to the monitor, scanning the dense legal text filling the screen. Someone was attempting to halt the multi-million-dollar acquisition, claiming they owned proprietary rights to my kelp-based formula. I scrolled to the bottom of the document to find the name of the claimant. It was my former academic advisor, a man who had contributed absolutely nothing to my physical work, but had overseen my early graduate studies. He was trying to steal my life's work, just days before the televised ceremony, using a legal loophole to freeze my payout. I printed the document to read the fine print. As I stared at the attached legal filing, I noticed a tiny string of numbers printed across the top margin of the injunction letter. It was a digital fax footprint, showing where the initial inquiry had originated. I recognized the area code and the trailing digits instantly. It was the dedicated fax line from my father's home office. The betrayal was about to cross from personal emotional abuse into devastating corporate sabotage. My father had not just disowned me. He had actively armed the predator trying to destroy my future. The digital fax footprint at the top of the legal injunction glared back at me from the bright monitor. A sequence of 10 numbers, printed in faint gray ink running along the upper margin of the scanned document. I knew that sequence by heart. I had dialed it every year on my father's birthday when I was away at college. It was the dedicated landline connected to the heavy black fax machine sitting in Howard's home office. My former academic advisor, Dr. Preston Cole, had filed a predatory legal motion to freeze my buyout just days before the televised gala. Preston was a man who built an entire career by stepping on the shoulders of his graduate students. He possessed a manufactured charm, wearing expensive linen suits and speaking with a soft, condescending tone that made you feel like you owed him your success. During my university years, he was notorious for attaching his name to research papers he barely read, absorbing the credit while the actual scientists toiled in the background. When I left his department to work independently in the Pearl Harbor warehouse, he laughed, calling my kelp-based packaging idea a cute hobby that would never secure funding. Now that the cute hobby had triggered a multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition, Preston wanted his unearned share. His legal filing claimed that the foundational chemistry for the bioplastic was developed while I was utilizing his university laboratory, making him a partial owner of the intellectual property. He assumed I was still the quiet, eager-to-please student who would fold under the threat of a prolonged legal battle. He expected me to surrender a percentage of my payout just to make the scary lawyers go away. 72 hours after receiving the notice, I walked into a sterile glass-walled conference room in downtown Honolulu for an emergency mediation. The air conditioning hummed aggressively, chilling the sleek mahogany table. Preston sat across from me, flanked by two sharp-suited attorneys. He wore a smug, relaxed expression, leaning back in his leather chair, as if he were attending a casual lunch, rather than an intellectual property dispute. He smiled at me, a thin, predatory stretching of his lips, and offered a patronizing greeting. I did not smile back. I sat down alone, placing a single silver flash drive onto the mahogany surface. The lead attorney for the conglomerate sitting to my right nodded, signaling for me to proceed. Preston's lawyer began a lengthy, rehearsed speech about academic collaboration and shared institutional resources. He threw around heavy legal jargon designed to intimidate. I listened patiently, observing the way Preston preened under the defense of his expensive legal counsel. When the attorney finally paused to gauge my reaction, I reached forward and plugged the flash drive into the multimedia terminal embedded in the table. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. I did not raise my voice or offer any defensive arguments. I simply walked them through the unassailable data. I projected a meticulously organized digital ledger containing 3 years of solo laboratory access logs. The records proved I had not stepped foot inside the university facility since the initial concept phase. I displayed time-stamped encrypted server backups of my proprietary formulas, each one logged originating from the independent Pearl Harbor warehouse IP address. Then I showed them the purchase receipts for the raw chemical compounds, proving I bought every single test material with my own personal funds. The final slide was a series of email exchanges between Preston and myself from 4 years ago, where he explicitly mocked the core methodology of my project, calling it scientifically unviable and formally declining to sponsor the research. The silence in the conference room became suffocating. Preston's smug expression vanished, replaced by a tight, pale grimace. His attorneys shuffled their papers, refusing to meet his gaze. I had not just defeated his claim. I had surgically dismantled his professional credibility in front of the most powerful corporate lawyers on the island. The conglomerate's lead counsel closed his folder, announcing that the injunction was frivolous and would be dismissed with prejudice immediately. I should have felt triumphant walking out of that glass-walled room. Instead, a cold, dark realization gnawed at my stomach. Preston Cole was a lazy academic who never tracked his former students. He would never have known about my pending corporate acquisition until the press release went public the night of the gala. Someone had tipped him off early. Someone had provided him with enough preliminary details to draft an injunction over a weekend. When I returned to my laboratory, I pulled up the high-resolution scan of the injunction filing again. I zoomed in on the gray fax footprint. I needed to understand the mechanics of the betrayal. I cross-referenced the date and timestamp on the transmission. The timeline fell together with sickening clarity. 3 days ago, Howard demanded I co-sign Tiffany's commercial loan. I had requested her business financials to assess the risk. Howard, sensing that I might actually possess the financial literacy to deny the loan, decided he needed leverage. He wanted to verify exactly how much my patent buyout was worth, so he could calculate exactly how much money he could extract from me. He dug through my old college mail, found a contact number for the university department, and reached out to Dr. Preston Cole. My father, acting under the guise of a proud parent, had initiated a conversation about my impending environmental award. But Howard Larson never does anything out of simple pride. He attempted to negotiate a 10% finder's fee with the academic advisor, offering to share confidential details about my corporate payout in exchange for a cut of whatever Preston could successfully sue me for. Howard handed the predator the exact ammunition needed to destroy my future. He risked my entire life's work, a global environmental solution, and my financial independence simply because he wanted a backdoor method to fund his golden child's failing swimwear shop. The revelation shifted my perspective fundamentally. Up until this point, I viewed my parents as emotionally manipulative parasites. They were heavy, exhausting burdens to carry, but I still categorized them as family. Discovering that my own father colluded with a corrupt academic to sabotage my corporate acquisition changed the entire equation. Howard was no longer just a toxic parent. He was an active, hostile threat to my survival. If he was willing to burn down a multi-million-dollar corporate merger just to secure a small percentage for Tiffany, there was no limit to the damage he would inflict. The gloves were officially off. The boundaries I was building could no longer be just emotional. They had to be impenetrable, legal fortresses. I sat in the quiet warehouse, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the harbor in deep shades of violet and bruised orange. My biological family had rendered themselves obsolete. They had proven they would sell my future for parts without a second thought. But celebrating a milestone of this magnitude alone felt like letting them steal my joy. I needed someone sitting next to me at that gala. I needed a witness who understood the true value of the woman wearing the emerald gown. I picked up my phone and scrolled past the blocked numbers of my parents and sister. I scrolled down to a contact I had not spoken to in months, but who had always occupied a quiet, steady space in my periphery. It was time to invite the only person who had ever treated me like a worthwhile investment. It was time to bring Aunt Diane into the light. I sat in the quiet warehouse watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the harbor in deep shades of violet and bruised orange. My biological family had just proven they viewed my ruin as an acceptable price for their comfort. They had weaponized my father to arm a predatory academic attempting to dismantle the most significant achievement of my professional life. I was standing on the threshold of a global environmental milestone, and the seats reserved for my blood relatives were going to remain starkly empty. But walking into that televised gala alone felt like letting Howard and Elaine steal my joy. I needed a witness. I required someone who looked at me and saw a living person, rather than a checking account ready to be drained. I picked up my phone and scrolled past the blocked numbers of my parents and sister. I navigated down to a contact I had not dialed in months. Aunt Diane. Diane is my mother's older sister. She is a retired middle school science teacher who lives a quiet, steady existence on the Big Island, cultivating orchids and reading historical biographies. She has been estranged from Elaine for over a decade. The estrangement did not stem from a loud, dramatic fight. It occurred because Diane simply refused to participate in the Larson family hierarchy. When Elaine demanded Diane contribute to Tiffany's endless pageant funds, Diane politely declined. When Howard suggested Diane serve as a guarantor for Tiffany's first luxury car loan, Diane laughed and hung up the phone. My aunt possessed a spine made of titanium, and she paid the price for it with banishment. My parents painted her as a bitter, solitary woman who hated her own relatives. I knew better. I pressed the call button. The line rang twice before she answered. Her voice was warm, crackling slightly over the cellular connection. I did not have to explain the sabotage or the fraudulent medical debt. I did not waste breath detailing the Waikiki restaurant extortion plot. I just told her my environmental patent was being acquired by a major conglomerate, and they were hosting an award ceremony on the Kona coast. I asked if she would do me the honor of being my guest. Diane did not ask what time the event started. She did not inquire if my parents were attending. She did not wonder if there was an open bar. She just took a slow, deep breath and said she would book the next inter-island flight to Oahu. Then she told me she was so proud of me, her voice thick with genuine, unshed tears. That simple sentence broke something open inside my chest. I had spent 32 years performing manual labor and financial gymnastics trying to extract that exact phrase from my parents. Diane offered it for free over a brief phone call. To understand why Diane mattered, you have to look back 20 years. When I was 12, I wanted a specific professional-grade chemistry set. It was a serious kit, equipped with real glass beakers, a brass alcohol burner, and genuine chemical compounds. I saved my allowance for 6 grueling months. I mowed lawns in the heavy tropical heat and washed cars until I accumulated half the retail cost in a glass jar on my desk. Howard promised to cover the remaining balance as my birthday gift. I spent weeks drawing diagrams of the experiments I planned to conduct, charting out molecular structures in a spiral notebook. The week before my birthday, Tiffany announced she needed to attend an elite cheerleading clinic on the mainland. The registration fee was steep. Howard walked into my bedroom, took the glass jar containing my lawn mowing money from my desk, and emptied it into his briefcase. He combined my savings with the funds he promised me and paid for Tiffany's cheer camp. He told me I needed to be a team player and that a chemistry kit was a frivolous toy for a girl. I remember sitting on my bed, staring at the empty jar, learning that my ambitions were fungible assets destined to be spent on my sister's whims. Diane visited from the Big Island 2 days later. She found me sitting on the back porch, reading a borrowed library book about marine ecosystems. She asked where my highly anticipated birthday chemistry set was. I kept my eyes focused on the pages and delivered the rehearsed excuse Howard had instructed me to say. I told her I decided cheerleading was a better investment for the household. Diane did not argue. She left the house and returned 3 hours later, carrying a large, heavy cardboard box. She set it on the porch next to me. It was the exact chemistry set I had been dreaming about. She did not make a grand speech. She just handed me a pair of safety goggles and told me to read the instruction manual carefully before handling the phosphorus. She treated my mind like an asset worth cultivating. While my parents treated me like an appliance that existed solely to facilitate Tiffany's shine, Diane treated me like a human being with a promising future. She planted the intellectual seed that eventually grew into a multi-million-dollar oceanic bioplastic. 2 days before the gala, Diane landed in Honolulu. I picked her up from the airport, expecting her to want rest after the flight. Instead, she grabbed my arm and directed me toward a high-end boutique district. She declared that the guest of honor could not walk a corporate red carpet wearing a clearance rack dress. We spent the afternoon in a quiet, sunlit dressing room. The atmosphere smelled of expensive perfume and polished hardwood. The saleswoman brought out elegant fabrics in deep ocean hues. Diane sat on a plush velvet sofa, sipping sparkling water, offering gentle but firm opinions. She did not make the shopping trip about herself. She did not complain about the prices, or sigh heavily to indicate I was being a burden. When the attendant zipped me into a structured emerald green evening gown, Diane stood up. The dress was flawless. It gathered at the waist and flowed down to the floor like liquid jade. The color mirrored the deep Pacific waters I spent my life studying. I looked in the full-length mirror and hardly recognized the woman reflecting back. The perpetual exhaustion, the hunched shoulders of the reliable daughter, they were gone. I stood tall, holding space in the room, looking like a woman who commanded respect. I reached for my purse to hand the attendant my debit card. Diane stepped in front of me, intercepting the transaction. She handed the woman her own premium credit card. I tried to protest. I told her the gown was far too expensive, and I could not let her shoulder that financial burden. Diane turned to me, placing her hands on my shoulders. She looked me straight in the eye and delivered a lesson I desperately needed to hear. She said, "Joanne, a gift with an invoice attached is not a gift, it is a trap. You have spent your entire life paying off traps. Today, you are just going to say thank you and let someone celebrate you." I stood in the dressing room and allowed myself to be celebrated. The emotional contrast was staggering. Spending time with my biological parents felt like walking through a minefield while carrying a heavy backpack. Every step required calculation. Every word required a defense strategy. Being with Diane felt like setting the backpack down. There was no hidden agenda. There was no impending demand for a commercial loan signature. There was just a retired teacher who wanted to see her niece shine. That afternoon solidified my resolve. I had spent the past week coordinating a flawless corporate exit strategy, ensuring my parents would be held accountable for their financial abuses. But navigating the legal logistics had left me feeling cold and clinical. Diane brought the warmth back into the equation. She reminded me that cutting out a toxic infection leaves room for healthy tissue to grow. She became the emotional anchor I needed to execute the final phase of my plan. That night, sitting at my kitchen table while Diane slept in the guest room, I opened my secure laptop. I accessed the encrypted secondary email account I had established years ago. I reviewed the final legal draft sent over by the conglomerate's acquisition lawyers. I had insisted on a very specific, non-negotiable clause hidden deep within the buyout contract. The corporate attorneys had pushed back initially, hesitant to complicate the intellectual property transfer. But I held my ground. Leveraging the global demand for the bioplastic, they eventually conceded, drafting the exact wealth redirection mechanism I required. I typed my digital signature onto the final page of the trust document, locking the legal framework into place. The generational wealth my father assumed he could extract, the payout my mother claimed was destined for my sister's failing boutique, it was all officially diverted. The trap was armed, and the safety was off. The morning of the gala arrived bright and clear. The trade winds swept across the island, carrying the promise of a reckoning. Diane and I packed our garment bags and boarded the short inter-island flight to Kona. We checked into the luxury resort where the conglomerate was hosting the event. The scale of the production was immense. News vans parked near the entrance, routing thick cables into the grand ballroom. Caterers carried trays of intricate hors d'oeuvres. The entire venue hummed with corporate energy and high-stakes anticipation. I stood in front of the vanity mirror in my hotel suite, smoothing the emerald fabric over my hips. Diane stood behind me, fastening a delicate gold clasp at the nape of my neck. We were hours away from the live broadcast. Across the ocean, on the island of Oahu, my parents and sister were preparing for their own evening. Tiffany was likely directing a makeup artist, while Howard mapped out his plan to order the most premium seafood on the Waikiki restaurant menu. They were operating under the smug delusion that my frozen credit card was holding their table, waiting to absorb their gluttony. The timeline of their humiliation was already ticking down. The stage was set for a dramatic split screen, showcasing the brutal difference between a reality built on hard work and an illusion built on stolen funds. The evening air on the Kona coast carried a crisp electric current as Diane and I stepped out of the black transport vehicle. The resort had transformed its sprawling oceanfront lanai into a glittering corporate sanctuary. Dozens of tall, crystalline pillars illuminated the pathways, casting refracted light across the manicured native grasses. International press teams clustered near the entrance, adjusting heavy camera lenses and speaking in rapid, overlapping languages. I smoothed the fabric of my emerald gown, feeling the cool silk glide against my skin. I did not feel like a warehouse technician anymore. I felt like the architect of a new era. Diane walked beside me, radiating a quiet, fierce pride. She did not shrink from the flashing bulbs. She linked her arm through mine, anchoring me to the reality of the moment. 200 miles away, on the island of Oahu, a very different scene was unfolding. I knew the exact layout of the establishment Tiffany had chosen for her manufactured triumph. The Waikiki seafood venue was notorious for its suffocating pretension. It featured dim, ambient lighting, mirrored ceilings, and a clientele desperate to be perceived as wealthy. Tiffany sat at the center of a large circular booth, flanked by 5 influencers who communicated almost exclusively through the front-facing cameras of their smartphones. They adjusted ring lights and captured stylized videos of their water glasses, ensuring their followers knew they were occupying premium real estate. Elaine sat to Tiffany's right, beaming with manufactured maternal warmth. Howard anchored the opposite side of the table, radiating unearned authority. He snapped his fingers to summon a passing waiter, a gesture that always made my stomach turn. Tonight, however, I was not there to smooth over his rudeness. I was standing under the brilliant lights of an ecotech celebration while they plunged headfirst into a spectacular financial abyss. The dramatic irony of the situation was a tangible object I could hold in my hand. Through mutual acquaintances who tracked Tiffany's public social media broadcasts, I knew exactly how they were behaving. Howard requested the premium wine list. He did not bother looking at the price columns. He confidently ordered 3 bottles of vintage champagne, each listed at $300. He instructed the staff to bring out 2 towering seafood platters, featuring imported lobster caviar and iced oysters, running $200 apiece. They toasted to Tiffany's empire, raising their crystal flutes into the air. They gorged themselves on delicacies, acting like royalty holding court. They operated under the ironclad certainty that my credit card was securely logged in the restaurant management system. They assumed the plastic rectangle resting in the digital file would quietly absorb their gluttony. They had no conception that I'd permanently frozen the account hours ago. They were feasting on a financial landmine, entirely blind to the ticking countdown beneath their plates. While Howard chewed on premium lobster tail, I stood in the grand ballroom of the Kona resort, shaking hands with global executives. The chief executive officer of the conglomerate approached me, offering a warm, respectful greeting. He did not ask me to fetch a beverage or fix a spreadsheet. He asked my opinion on the scalable future of marine biodegradable polymers. He listened when I spoke. Diane stood nearby, watching me command the room. Her eyes reflected a deep, satisfying validation. She had invested in a 12-year-old girl with a broken plastic trophy, and she was currently witnessing the return on her emotional capital. Back in Waikiki, the delusion was reaching a fever pitch. Tiffany recorded a live video praising her supportive parents for financing her boutique launch. She spun a beautiful fiction about building a luxury brand from the ground up, conveniently omitting the stolen medical funds that secured her commercial lease. Elaine preened for the camera, adjusting her hair and offering shallow platitudes about family loyalty. They periodically checked their phones, assuming my incoming apology text was imminent. They expected me to beg for their forgiveness, pleading to be allowed back into their good graces. They probably laughed about my temporary rebellion, certain that the cold shoulder would quickly break my resolve. There is a fascinating psychological blind spot inherent in toxic family structures. The parasites become so accustomed to the host providing constant, effortless nutrients that they forget the host possesses the ability to detach. They spend decades treating the reliable daughter like a localized ATM, extracting funds, energy, and emotional labor without consequence. They confuse submission with weakness. They underestimate the exact moment the scapegoat realizes she holds all the purchasing power. For 32 years, they controlled the narrative because I allowed them to dictate my worth. I believed their approval was the currency required to survive. But standing in that ballroom, surrounded by brilliant minds and supportive peers, the mathematical truth of our dynamic became undeniably clear. They did not possess any actual power. They only possessed the power I willingly surrendered to them. The moment I stopped funding their illusion, their entire hierarchy collapsed into a pile of unpaid invoices. They were not wealthy benefactors cultivating a lifestyle brand. They were broke, desperate actors performing a play on a stage they did not own. And the landlord had just changed the locks. The evening progressed. The Kona Gala transitioned from the cocktail hour into the seated dinner portion of the event. Waitstaff delivered plates of sustainably sourced local cuisine. The lighting dimmed, shifting the focus to the main stage, where an oversized digital screen displayed the conglomerate logo. The energy in the room hummed with anticipation. Simultaneously, the Waikiki dinner was moving into its most expensive phase. Howard was likely ordering a round of rare, after-dinner spirits. The influencers were ordering decadent desserts dusted with edible gold leaf. The total tally on their restaurant tab was inflating at an astronomical rate, climbing higher with every casual gesture toward the waitstaff. They were digging a pit so deep that climbing out would require a financial miracle. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, savoring the crisp, clean taste. The contrast between my reality and their impending disaster was delicious. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. Guilt is an emotion reserved for those who cause unprovoked harm. I was merely allowing the laws of cause and effect to execute their natural course. I had removed the safety net, and gravity was about to do the rest. As the keynote speaker approached the microphone on the gala stage, I felt a sudden, persistent vibration against the silk lining of my clutch. The orchestrated silence of my phone had finally broken. The dinner in Honolulu had reached the critical point where the plates were cleared and the check was being printed. The trap was tightening, and the frantic scramble to avoid the crushing weight of reality was about to begin. The psychological warfare was entering its final desperate stage, and my phone was the battlefield. The rhythmic buzzing against my hip felt like a trapped insect attempting to escape from the silk lining of my emerald evening bag. The physical sensation was sharp and urgent, cutting through the ambient elegance of the Kona Resort ballroom. Around me, executives in tailored suits and scientists in formal wear clinked crystal glasses discussing global sustainability. Waitstaff glided past, carrying trays of seared ahi and roasted macadamia nuts. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the salty breeze blowing in from the Pacific. Yet all my attention narrowed down to that relentless, mechanical vibration pulsing against my side. The psychological warfare had officially breached the perimeter of my celebration. I unclasped the gold hardware of my purse and slipped the phone out into the palm of my hand. The screen illuminated, projecting a harsh white glare into the dimly lit room. The notifications were flooding the display, overlapping one another in rapid succession. The Waikiki restaurant had clearly attempted to run a pre-authorization on my frozen account, or perhaps Tiffany had tried to close out a portion of their astronomical tab early to impress her influencer friends. Whatever the trigger, the financial landmine had detonated under their table. The first wave of text messages came from my mother. Elaine always initiated her campaigns with a thin veneer of maternal concern. Her opening messages were a textbook display of manipulative sweetness. She typed that there seemed to be a silly glitch with my bank. She asked if I was having a wonderful time at my little science dinner and requested I quickly call my credit card provider to clear up a minor security hold. She included a smiley face emoji and a heart attempting to mask the rising panic in her tone. Reading those initial texts triggered a profound, involuntary reaction in my body. The trauma bond is not a metaphor. It is a biological response forged over decades of conditioned survival. My heart rate accelerated, hammering against my ribs in a frantic, uneven rhythm. A cold sweat pricked the back of my neck. My fingertips went numb. For 32 years, my nervous system had been wired to interpret my family's displeasure as a mortal threat. My brain flooded with cortisol, screaming at me to fix the problem, to smooth over the rough edges, to open my wallet and purchase my way back into their good graces. The deeply ingrained urge to surrender was nearly overwhelming. A dark, anxious voice in my head whispered that if I just unlocked the card, if I just paid the extortion fee, the crippling anxiety would instantly evaporate. I could return to my gala, sip my sparkling water, and avoid the catastrophic fallout of their wrath. The reliable daughter inside me clawed at the walls of my chest, begging to execute a digital transfer and buy a quiet night. I took a slow, ragged breath, staring at the glowing screen. I did not move my thumbs to the keyboard. I just watched the incoming messages change their shape. When my silence stretched past the 2-minute mark, Elaine abandoned her sweet facade. The honey evaporated, leaving behind pure venom. The next rapid-fire succession of texts discarded any pretense of a bank error. She knew exactly what I had done, and her fury bled through the digital text. She demanded I fix the situation immediately. She wrote that Tiffany was crying in the middle of the dining room and her important guests were becoming uncomfortable. Elaine typed in all capital letters ordering me to stop being a spiteful child. Then the final message arrived, distilling their entire conditional relationship into a single, vicious command. Do not ruin your sister's night. Ensure the card clears now. I stood in the center of the glittering ballroom, reading the ultimate demand. They were sitting at a table surrounded by empty oyster shells and drained champagne bottles, holding a bill they could not satisfy, demanding that the daughter they disowned rescue them from their own gluttony. They still believed they held the reins. They assumed my lifelong terror of their rejection would override my newfound boundaries. I looked up from the screen. My eyes scanned the crowd until I found her. Aunt Diane was standing near a towering floral arrangement, speaking with a renowned marine biologist. She wore a deep sapphire dress, her silver hair catching the ambient light. As if sensing the shift in my internal gravity, she paused her conversation and looked across the room. Diane saw the glowing phone in my hand. She saw the tension rigid in my shoulders. She did not rush over to coddle me or ask frantic questions. She simply locked eyes with me and offered a single steadying nod. It was a microscopic gesture, but it contained the weight of an entire sanctuary. That nod communicated everything I needed to hear. It reminded me that a gift with an invoice attached is a trap. It reminded me that the people who genuinely love you do not hold you hostage over a restaurant check. Diane anchored me to the present moment, pulling me out of the terrifying current of my childhood conditioning. The racing drumbeat in my chest began to slow. The cold numbness in my fingertips faded, replaced by a warm, surging clarity. I looked back down at the screen. Elaine's threats were still sitting there, glaring in harsh black text. Howard was likely preparing to dial my number, ready to unleash his booming voice to terrify me into submission. I did not type a response. I did not draft a clever retort or demand an apology for the stolen down payment. Explaining your boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding you is just another form of unpaid labor. I placed my thumb on the side of the device. I navigated to the Control Center menu and pressed the crescent moon icon. The screen displayed a confirmation banner indicating that Do Not Disturb mode was now active. All incoming calls would be sent directly to voicemail. All text notifications would be silenced and hidden. I pressed the power button, turning the display pitch black. I unclasped my emerald clutch and slipped the heavy metallic device inside and snapped the gold hardware shut. In that precise physical motion, the invisible tether snapped. The conditioning broke. I was no longer the frightened pack mule carrying the financial burdens of a family who despised me. I was a sovereign entity. By severing the line of communication, I officially sealed the borders of my life. I trapped my parents and my sister at a premium table in Waikiki with an astronomically inflating bill they could not afford to pay. They had ordered the most expensive items on the menu, operating under the delusion of their own superiority. They were now stranded on an island of their own making, surrounded by a moat of unpaid invoices and declining credit limits. The restaurant staff would soon demand a valid form of payment. The influencer friends would witness the humiliating reality behind Tiffany's fabricated empire. The trap was fully sprung, and there was no escape hatch. A profound sense of victory washed over me. It was not the loud, chaotic triumph of a screaming match. It was the quiet, devastating triumph of a closed door. A sudden shift in the ballroom environment pulled my attention away from my purse. The ambient jazz music faded into silence. The warm, overhead chandeliers dimmed, casting the periphery of the room into shadow. Bright theatrical spotlights ignited, carving sharp beams of light through the darkness and innovations the main stage. The international press crews positioned near the edges of the room sprang into action. Red recording lights blinked to life on the heavy television cameras. Technicians adjusted audio levels and signaled to the producers standing in the wings. The live broadcast was officially initiating. The chief executive officer of the ecotech conglomerate stepped out from behind a velvet curtain and walked to the center of the stage. He adjusted the microphone, looking out over the sea of silent, expectant faces. He carried a leather-bound portfolio bearing the official seal of the acquisition. My pulse quickened again, but this time it was fueled by anticipation rather than dread. The financial execution in Waikiki was only the first half of my exit strategy. The second half was about to be televised across the entire Hawaiian archipelago. I knew that on the other side of the island, in the very restaurant where my parents were currently facing their ruin, a specific set of instructions was about to be carried out. The bartender was reaching for a remote control, ready to turn up the volume on the local news channel. The true scale of my retaliation was moving from the shadows into the blinding light of a global broadcast. The heavy velvet curtains parted with a soft, sweeping sound, signaling the initiation of the main event. The ambient chatter in the Kona ballroom dissolved into a hushed, reverent silence. Victor, the chief executive officer of the ecotech conglomerate, stepped into the center of the stage. He moved with the measured, deliberate pacing of a man accustomed to directing global markets. The red recording indicators on the network cameras burned bright, beaming the high-definition feed to every major news station across the Hawaiian Islands and streaming directly to international investors. I sat beside Aunt Diane, maintaining a straight posture, the cool silk of my emerald gown contrasting with the warm stage lighting spilling over our table. 200 miles away, the atmosphere inside the dim, mirrored Waikiki seafood establishment was undergoing a drastic, sudden shift. The appetizer plates had been cleared from Tiffany's premium booth. The empty shells of expensive imported oysters sat abandoned on beds of crushed ice. Howard was likely shifting in his tufted leather seat, checking his gold watch, waiting for the waitress to return with the final, staggering bill. He operated under the smug delusion that my credit card was still holding the tab. Instead, a very different sequence of events initiated. Earlier that week, I had contacted the restaurant management and made a highly specific prepaid arrangement. A server approached my family's table carrying a simple silver bucket. Inside rested a single bottle of the establishment's cheapest standard sparkling wine. It was a stark, intentional downgrade from the vintage French labels they had recklessly consumed earlier in the evening. The server placed the bucket on the crisp linen tablecloth and handed my father a small sealed white envelope. Howard, likely assuming the restaurant management was offering a complimentary drink to apologize for a billing delay, tore open the flap. Printed in crisp black ink on the enclosed card was a strict 4-word directive. Watch Channel 4 now. At that exact second, the bartender working behind the mahogany counter executed the second half of my instructions. He picked up a remote control, pointed it at the large flat-screen televisions mounted above the top-tier liquor displays, and switched the input. He selected the primary local news network and significantly increased the volume. The ambient background jazz music faded, instantly replaced by the authoritative voice of a news anchor announcing a groundbreaking environmental acquisition happening live on the Kona coast. On the gala stage, Victor adjusted the microphone stand. His voice resonated through the ballroom speakers and across the broadcast waves. He spoke eloquently about the fragile, delicate ecosystem of the Pacific. He described the millions of tons of synthetic garbage currently choking the ocean currents, a suffocating layer of indestructible waste generated by careless corporate practices. He painted a vivid, bleak picture of marine life drowning in commercial byproduct. Then Victor shifted his tone. His voice warmed, radiating genuine, profound awe. He announced that the solution to this global crisis did not originate in a prestigious mainland laboratory or a heavily funded European institute. It emerged from a corrugated metal warehouse near Pearl Harbor. He described a local marine biologist who spent 5 grueling years engineering a polymer that protected valuable cargo across turbulent waters, but possessed the remarkable ability to dissolve harmlessly once its purpose was fulfilled. He spoke about eliminating toxicity. He spoke about leaving behind a cleaner, sustainable world. In the Honolulu restaurant, the clinking of silverware ceased entirely. Howard, Elaine, and Tiffany sat frozen, their eyes locked on the glowing screens above the bar. The camera angles shifted from Victor's face to a wide, panning shot of the glittering Kona ballroom. Then the lens zoomed in tight, focusing directly on my table. There I was, broadcast in brilliant high definition across the state. I did not look like the exhausted, reliable workhorse who fixed their internet routers and absorbed their endless insults. I looked like a sovereign architect of industry. The emerald gown caught the theatrical lighting, projecting an image of undeniable success. Aunt Diane sat beside me looking elegant and fiercely proud. The sheer monumental scale of my achievement was laid bare in front of them. This was not a curated social media post or a rented VIP booth funded by stolen money. This was a multi-million-dollar corporate reality, and my biological family was entirely locked on the outside, looking in. My sister's manufactured influencer empire suddenly resembled a child's lemonade stand compared to the global enterprise validating my life's work. The 5 internet friends Tiffany had invited to witness her fake success were now staring at the television, watching her estranged older sister command international press coverage. The curated facade of the swimwear boutique soft opening crumbled under the weight of actual, verifiable triumph. Howard, the man who had labeled me a family disgrace just 3 weeks prior, was forced to watch the rest of the world hand me a crown. Elaine, who had dismissed my invention as playing in the seaweed, watched the corporate elite hang on every word regarding my patent. Victor called my name. The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. The sound was deafening, a wave of acoustic validation crashing over me. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my dress. Diane reached out and squeezed my hand, transmitting a silent current of strength. I stepped into the center aisle and began the walk toward the stage. The bright spotlights tracked my movements, slicing through the dim room. Camera flashes popped in rapid succession, capturing my ascent. I climbed the short wooden staircase, feeling the solid stage floor beneath my heels. Every step felt like shedding a physical layer of the suffocating expectations I had carried for over 3 decades. I was leaving the quiet, obedient daughter sitting in the shadows and stepping into the blinding light of my own autonomy. Victor met me at the podium. He handed me the heavy obsidian glass award. The cool, smooth surface grounded me in the present moment. He stepped back, gesturing for me to take the microphone. The room quieted, a sea of expectant faces waiting for my acceptance speech. I looked out over the crowd, but my mind held 2 distinct alternating images. I saw the brilliant scientists and supportive executives sitting in front of me, and I envisioned my parents sitting in stunned silence 200 miles away. I pictured them trapped in a luxury dining room facing a bill they could not pay, watching the daughter they discarded hold the keys to a kingdom. I leaned into the microphone. I knew my voice was echoing through the speakers of the Waikiki restaurant. I knew Howard, Elaine, and Tiffany were hanging on every single syllable, desperately hoping I would mention their names. They were likely praying I would offer them a lifeline of public recognition to save their crumbling pride in front of their guests. I had prepared a speech, but it was not the standard expression of gratitude they anticipated. I was not going to thank my parents for their non-existent support. I was not going to pretend their toxic household had fostered my genius. Instead, I prepared to execute a legal and financial maneuver that would permanently sever their access to my wealth. I looked down at the podium, where a leather portfolio waited, holding the signed documents for a highly specific royalty trust. The time for quiet endurance had passed. It was time to publicly redirect the karma they had earned. I grasped the polished edges of the mahogany podium. The bright, theatrical lights generated a distinct encompassing heat against my skin. The heavy obsidian glass award rested near my right hand. I leaned closer to the slim microphone. The sprawling ballroom fell profoundly quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the broadcast equipment transmitting my image across the state. I began my address. I did not deliver a generic string of corporate platitudes. I spoke about the fundamental nature of creation. I told the audience that genuine innovation never occurs in isolation. It requires a fertile environment. It demands a specific type of resource allocation. It requires an investor. I scanned the crowd of distinguished scientists and affluent executives. I explained that society often misinterprets the concept of investment. People assume an investor is merely an entity supplying venture capital in exchange for a guaranteed equity stake. But true investment is recognizing potential long before it yields any tangible dividend. It is the act of nurturing a fragile idea without attaching a suffocating invoice to the effort. I knew my biological relatives were watching the feed in their upscale Waikiki booth. I aimed my next words directly at the camera lens broadcasting straight to their table. I shared a philosophy that had been texted to me just hours prior. I stated that a wise woman recently reminded me of a crucial rule regarding prosperity. She declared that family wealth stays with the family who supports each other. I paused, letting the gravity of that statement settle over the room. I looked directly into the recording lens and said I agreed with that sentiment entirely. The time had come to execute that exact philosophy on a global scale. I directed the attention of the room toward the front table. The spotlight shifted, tracking my gesture, until it illuminated Aunt Diane. She sat in her deep sapphire dress, looking dignified and composed. I introduced her to the world not merely as my aunt, but as the primary angel investor of the entire environmental project. I recounted a story from my childhood. I described a 12-year-old girl who spent 6 grueling months pushing a lawnmower through heavy tropical heat, saving every dollar to purchase a professional chemistry kit. I explained how those meager savings were abruptly confiscated and spent on a frivolous cheerleading camp for a favored sibling. The audience murmured, registering the profound injustice of the memory. Then I told them about the retired middle school science teacher who quietly intervened. A woman who used her modest pension to replace the stolen funds, purchasing the exact scientific equipment the young girl desired. She did not ask for endless gratitude. She did not demand the girl co-sign a disastrous commercial loan decades later. She simply handed over a pair of safety goggles and encouraged a curious mind to explore the elements. I turned away from the microphone and signaled for Victor to return to the stage. The chief executive officer walked forward, carrying a thick, leather-bound portfolio bearing the gold-embossed emblem of his conglomerate. I needed to explain the administrative fortress I had spent years building. Earlier in my career, I established a highly secure encrypted electronic mail network. I utilized that private channel to construct a distinct legal entity. For years, my parents assumed I was hoarding my modest marine biology salary, hiding my resources from their constant extortion attempts. They were entirely incorrect. The impenetrable financial trust was never designed to protect my own checking accounts. It was engineered specifically to harbor hers. Victor took his position at the podium. His booming, authoritative voice filled the venue. He addressed the crowd, detailing the intense acquisition negotiations we conducted over the previous month. He revealed that I had presented the corporate attorneys with a singular, non-negotiable demand. Before I would surrender the rights to the kelp-based packaging patent, the conglomerate had to agree to a permanent, irrevocable wealth distribution clause. Victor opened the leather portfolio. He announced the terms of my ultimate stipulation. The conglomerate officially granted Diane a 5% royalty trust in perpetuity. That percentage applied to all global manufacturing revenue generated by the bioplastic across international shipping markets. The financial sum was staggering. It was not a one-time bonus or a polite ceremonial gesture. It was generational wealth secured by ironclad corporate law. A representative from the legal team walked down the short wooden staircase and approached the front table. He presented the heavy sealed binder directly to Diane. My aunt sat perfectly still. The realization of what was occurring washed over her features. She looked at the gold-embossed documents, and then she looked up at me standing on the stage. The resilient, stoic woman who had endured a decade of banishment from her own sister began to weep. Genuine, joyful tears streamed down her face. She placed her trembling hands over her mouth, overwhelmed by the sudden, staggering influx of prosperity. The ballroom erupted. 200 executives, scientists, and journalists rose to their feet, delivering a thunderous standing ovation. The applause cascaded through the vast space, vibrating the floorboards beneath my heels. The cameras captured every angle of Diane, clutching the legal binder, documenting the precise second a retired teacher became a multimillionaire on live television. I stood bathed in the blinding theatrical lights, soaking in the sheer perfection of the moment. I had fulfilled Elaine's text message mandate with surgical precision. The wealth was indeed staying with the family, who offered genuine support. I had legally, permanently redirected the financial windfall my parents felt supremely entitled to receive. I bypassed their greedy extended hands and bestowed the fortune directly upon the only relative who never treated my existence like a transactional burden. I pictured the scene unfolding on the opposite side of the island. Howard and Elaine were currently sitting in their dim, mirrored dining room, digesting the reality of the broadcast. They had spent their entire lives treating me like an unglamorous appliance meant to generate comfort for Tiffany. They had confidently expected me to cave under the threat of their social isolation. They assumed my success was their property. Instead, they were forced to watch an astronomical fortune slip through their fingers and land squarely in the lap of the sister they had shunned and ridiculed. The psychological devastation they must have been experiencing was profound. They could not argue with a binding corporate contract. They could not manipulate a multinational conglomerate. Their control over my resources was officially terminated. The applause eventually began to taper off. I smiled at Diane, offering a silent promise that her days of quiet isolation were over. I stepped away from the podium, allowing Victor to conclude the formal presentation. My role in the spotlight was finished. The trap had been flawlessly executed in front of a global audience. As I walked down the stage stairs rejoining my newly wealthy aunt, my thoughts drifted back to the Waikiki seafood establishment. The corporate victory was incredibly satisfying, but the evening was far from over. The news segment had delivered the fatal psychological blow, but the physical consequences of their arrogance were still looming. They were sitting at a table surrounded by empty oyster shells and drained vintage bottles. The harsh reality of their financial situation was about to arrive on a small silver tray, carried by an expectant waiter. While the ballroom on the Kona coast erupted into a standing ovation, the atmosphere inside the dimly lit Waikiki dining room fractured. The television screen above the mahogany bar continued to broadcast Diane holding the gold-embossed legal portfolio. Howard, Elaine, and Tiffany sat paralyzed in their tufted leather booth. The cheap sparkling wine I had arranged to be sent to their table remained untouched, warming in its silver bucket. The extravagant illusion they had spent the entire evening constructing was evaporating right before their widening eyes. Howard had spent his adult life cultivating an aura of unearned prosperity. He financed luxury vehicles he could barely afford and maintained expensive country club memberships by quietly drowning in revolving debt. He relied on my steady financial infusions to plug the gaping holes in his ledger. Now sitting in the upscale seafood establishment he was forced to digest a staggering reality. The reliable safety net was gone, and the generational windfall he felt entitled to possess had just been legally bound to the sister he banished. The devastating television segment concluded, returning to standard local programming. At that precise second, the waiter approached their booth. He carried a sleek black leather check presenter, setting it gently on the pristine white tablecloth. The server offered a polite smile, expressing his hope that the VIP soft opening had been an exquisite experience. He walked away, leaving the leather booklet resting near the empty oyster shells. Tiffany, portraying the affluent lifestyle brand owner, reached for the booklet with a manicured hand. She opened the flap. The total printed at the bottom of the itemized receipt was $3,200. The tab reflected the vintage French champagne, the towering tiered seafood platters, and the decadent gold-dusted desserts. It was a spectacular sum, accumulated by people who assumed another person was absorbing the cost. Tiffany pulled a sleek metallic credit card from her designer purse. It was the card tied directly to her failing boutique, the business secretly funded by my stolen medical money. She signaled the waiter, handing over the plastic rectangle with an air of practiced nonchalance. The server returned 3 minutes later. His polite smile had faded, replaced by a strained professional grimace. He informed Tiffany that the terminal had rejected the transaction due to insufficient funds. A cold sweat began to form on Howard's forehead. Tiffany's face flushed a deep crimson. The 5 influencer guests sitting around the booth suddenly stopped recording videos on their smartphones. The glamorous facade was cracking, exposing the hollow foundation underneath. Howard, eager to preserve his patriarchal authority, waved the server over. He retrieved his own premium rewards card from his wallet, offering a booming, confident laugh. He loudly claimed that retail bank accounts often flag large dinner purchases for fraud protection. The server took Howard's card and walked back to the point-of-sale system. 5 excruciating minutes passed. When the waiter returned, he was accompanied by the general manager of the restaurant. The manager wore a crisp dark suit and an expression of polite, lethal efficiency. He placed Howard's card onto the table. He leaned down and spoke in a hushed, discreet tone, ensuring the surrounding tables could not hear the humiliating truth. Both of Howard's accounts had returned a hard decline. His credit limits were entirely exhausted. The social currency of an influencer relies heavily on proximity to wealth and success. The moment the 5 invited guests smelled financial ruin, the atmosphere at the table shifted. They did not offer to split the bill. They did not reach for their own wallets. Instead, they began an awkward, frantic symphony of excuses. One mentioned an early morning brand photo shoot. Another claimed they needed to relieve a babysitter. Within 60 seconds, the 5 internet celebrities had gathered their expensive handbags and practically sprinted toward the valet stand, leaving my biological relatives stranded with the catastrophic check. The restaurant manager stood tall, looming over the booth. He explained the harsh administrative reality of the situation. A bill of $3,200 cannot simply be washed away with an apology. The establishment had provided premium goods and services. The manager stated that if a valid form of payment was not produced within the next 10 minutes, company protocol required him to contact the Honolulu authorities. He used a specific legal phrase that drained the remaining color from my mother's face. Theft of services. In the state of Hawaii, defrauding an innkeeper or restaurant for a sum exceeding $300 elevates the crime to a severe offense. The manager was politely threatening to have them escorted out of the dining room in handcuffs. The sheer terror of public arrest in the middle of Waikiki, surrounded by affluent peers, shattered Elaine's curated poise. She frantically ordered Howard to call me to demand I unlock my frozen account and fulfill my obligations as a daughter. Howard pulled out his phone, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He dialed my number. The call routed directly to my voicemail greeting. My device remained locked in Do Not Disturb mode, safely tucked inside my emerald clutch. The panic in his eyes intensified. He scrolled through his contacts, searching for anyone who could float a $3,000 emergency loan at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. His country club acquaintances would demand explanations. His neighbors would gossip. He possessed no genuine friends, only transactional associations. As Howard stared at his glowing screen, a devastating epiphany struck him. There was only one person in his entire contact list who currently possessed that level of liquid capital. There was only one relative who had just been publicly granted a multi-million-dollar corporate payout. The grand ballroom on the Kona coast buzzed with celebratory energy. The formal presentation had concluded, transitioning into a vibrant reception. I stood near a towering floral arrangement, sipping sparkling water, while industry leaders approached to offer their congratulations. Aunt Diane stood beside me, holding her leather-bound trust portfolio like a shield. She looked radiant, exuding the quiet confidence of a woman who had just been handed the keys to her own future. Suddenly, Diane's evening bag vibrated. She unclasped the hardware and retrieved her cellular device. She stared at the caller identification screen. A slow, profound smile spread across her features. She turned the screen toward me, allowing me to witness the incoming call. The name flashing on the display was Howard Larson. The man who had spent the last decade mocking her modest lifestyle, treating her like a pitiful outcast, was now calling to beg for a bailout. The brother-in-law who stole his own daughter's savings to fund a vanity project was trapped in a restaurant, facing police intervention, praying the sister he banished would rescue him from the consequences of his own greed. Diane did not look angry. She did not look vindictive. She looked serene. She met my gaze, acknowledging the poetic alignment of the universe. She did not answer the call to gloat or deliver a triumphant speech. Answering the phone would imply that Howard still possessed the power to command her attention. Diane simply raised her thumb and pressed the red decline button. She sent his desperate plea into the digital void. She slipped the phone back into her purse, snapped the clasp shut, and turned her attention back to the ocean view. Their systemic greed had engineered their ultimate, inescapable humiliation. They had constructed an elaborate trap designed to extort my resources, and they ended up locking themselves inside it. I knew what would happen next. I knew Howard would soon exhaust every avenue and resort to leaving frantic messages on my own voicemail. The 40 missed calls were imminent. The stage was set for my final act of severance. The formal reception in the Kona ballroom gradually began to wind down. The international press crews packed their heavy equipment into padded cases. Waitstaff cleared the final crystal glasses from the linen-draped tables. I stood near the grand entrance, exchanging final handshakes and quiet words of gratitude with the corporate executives who had just changed the trajectory of my life. Aunt Diane lingered a few paces away, speaking softly with a marine biologist, her leather-bound trust portfolio held securely against her chest. The evening had been a profound validation of my scientific efforts, but a final piece of administrative business remained unresolved. I excused myself from the group and walked toward the large glass doors leading out to the open oceanfront lanai. The night air felt incredibly crisp, carrying the distinct sharp scent of volcanic rock and cooling seawater. I stepped away from the ambient noise of the receding party and found a secluded corner overlooking the dark Pacific horizon. I unclasped my emerald evening bag and reached inside. My fingers brushed the smooth metal surface of my cellular device. The psychological fortress I had maintained for the past 3 hours was about to open its gates. I disabled the Do Not Disturb function. The screen immediately lit up, displaying a staggering digital wreckage. There were exactly 40 missed calls logged in a frantic vertical column. They alternated in rapid succession between my father and my mother. Accompanying the missed calls were 14 separate voicemails. In a toxic family structure, a voicemail is rarely used to convey information. It is utilized as a blunt instrument to inflict guilt and demand immediate compliance. I pressed the phone to my ear and listened to the first few recordings. The chronological progression of their panic was a fascinating psychological study. The earliest messages from Elaine were hushed and urgent. She whispered into the receiver, pleading with me to answer and provide the security code for my frozen credit card. She described the restaurant manager looming over their booth. By the 7th voicemail, the tone drastically shifted. Howard took over the communication. The restaurant crisis temporarily took a back seat to the astonishing reality they had just witnessed on the local news broadcast. Howard did not sound proud of my corporate acquisition. He sounded ravenous. His voice took on a demanding, authoritative cadence. He insisted that as my parents, they were entitled to a significant portion of the buyout capital. He stated that keeping such a lucrative business deal a secret was a deep betrayal of familial trust. He demanded I call him back immediately to discuss how we would structure their percentage. The final recorded message was a masterclass in desperate delusion. Elaine wept openly into the microphone, claiming the Honolulu police were threatening to escort them from the premises. She begged me to show mercy, while simultaneously demanding I instruct the conglomerate to revoke Diane's royalty trust. She genuinely believed she could dictate the terms of my corporate contracts while sitting in a restaurant holding a fraudulent tab she could not satisfy. I deleted every single recording without saving a single file. They were obsolete artifacts from a lifetime I no longer occupied. As my thumb hovered over the digital trash icon, the phone vibrated in my palm. The screen flashed, displaying an incoming call. It was the 41st attempt. The caller identification confirmed it was Howard. I did not silence the device. I did not send him to voicemail. The time for strategic silence had passed. It was time to deliver the final audit. I pressed the green icon accepting the call and lifted the speaker to my ear. I did not offer a greeting. I simply listened to the chaotic background noise on the other end of the line. I heard the distinct murmur of a busy dining room and the sharp, authoritative voice of a restaurant manager speaking in the distance. Then Howard spoke. His voice was a chaotic mixture of forced laughter and sheer, unadulterated terror. Joanne gasped, his breath coming in short, uneven bursts. "Thank goodness you finally picked up the phone. We are having a terrible misunderstanding with the billing department here in Waikiki. The terminal is rejecting the card you put on file. I need you to read me the updated security code right now. The manager is being incredibly unreasonable." He paused, waiting for my compliant response. When I offered nothing but the sound of the ocean breeze, he attempted a different tactic. He tried to rewrite our entire history in a single sentence. "Look, Joanne, I know we had a little disagreement earlier," he chuckled, a thin, reedy sound lacking any actual humor. "You know I did not mean those things I said in the driveway. I was just stressed about your sister's business. You are not a disgrace. You are a brilliant, successful woman, and we are so proud of your television segment tonight. Now please just give the waiter the authorization code so we can leave this awful place and celebrate your big victory as a family." He was deploying the oldest trick in the manipulative playbook. He was attempting to sweep decades of emotional abuse under a rug of false praise, believing a few hollow compliments would erase the profound damage he had inflicted. He thought I was still the 14-year-old girl holding a broken plastic trophy, desperate for his validation. I rested my free hand on the cool metal railing of the lanai. I kept my voice meticulously level, stripping away any trace of anger or sorrow. I adopted the precise, clinical tone of a forensic accountant presenting irrefutable evidence of a crime. "I am not going to authorize the restaurant payment, Howard," I said. The words hung in the night air, sharp and definitive. The forced laughter on his end abruptly vanished. "What are you talking about?" he hissed, dropping the facade. "The police are on their way, Joanne. You cannot do this to your sister. You cannot leave us stranded here." "I can, and I am," I replied smoothly, "because my financial obligations to this family were fulfilled exactly 2 years ago, on August 14th. A dense, heavy silence fell over the cellular connection. The specific date acted like a physical blow. I did not give him time to recover. I opened the mental file I had memorized from the blue manila folder. I recited the data with lethal accuracy. 2 years ago, you called me weeping. You claimed you needed a specialized spinal procedure to avoid a wheelchair. You told me your insurance denied the claim. You requested $25,000. I canceled the escrow on my first home and wired that exact amount directly into your joint checking account. Joanne, you do not understand," he stammered, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "I understand perfectly," I countered, cutting off his defense. "Because 3 days ago, when you demanded I co-sign Tiffany's commercial loan, I audited her business ledgers. I saw the entry marked initial seed money. It was deposited on August 14th. The amount was $25,000. You did not have a medical emergency, Howard. You engineered a phantom crisis to steal my down payment and secure a luxury commercial lease for your favored daughter. You took the roof over my head and turned it into velvet hangers and Italian marble." The line went dead quiet. He possessed no argument. He possessed no clever excuse or manipulative spin. I had presented the exact unassailable receipts of his fraud. The silence of a caught predator is a very specific sound, and I allowed it to echo between us for a long, satisfying moment. "You told me earlier this week that I was a selfish disappointment," I continued, my voice unwavering. "You demanded to know what kind of daughter refuses to support her family. But I have supported you. I funded your appliance repairs, your property taxes, and your fraudulent medical debts. I subsidized the illusion of your wealth for a decade. The $25,000 you stole was the final invoice. Please, he whispered, a raw, pathetic sound, stripping away all his unearned authority. Please, Joanne. They are calling the officers right now. Then you should probably call an attorney, I suggested calmly. Because the bank of the reliable daughter is permanently closed. The accounts are fully settled. There is no remaining balance to draw from. You will have to face the consequences of your own extravagant choices without my safety net to catch your fall. I did not wait for a rebuttal. I did not wait for Elaine to snatch the phone or for Tiffany to scream her apologies. I pulled the device away from my ear and pressed the red icon terminating the call. I stood on the lanai and opened my contact list. I selected Howard's profile and navigated to the security options. I tapped the block caller command. I repeated the exact same meticulous process for Elaine. I executed the final block on Tiffany's number. In 3 swift digital motions, I severed the toxic arteries that had drained my energy for 32 years. The screen returned to its neutral default state. The relentless buzzing ceased entirely. The quiet of the Kona night rushed in to fill the space. There were no more demands, no more threats, no more manufactured emergencies waiting to destroy my peace. The isolation they had threatened me with had become my greatest sanctuary. I turned away from the dark ocean and walked back through the glass doors, re-entering the bright, warm light of the gala. My aunt was waiting for me, her smile radiant and secure. The final cord was cut, and the rest of my life was officially ready to begin. The morning sun crested over the jagged volcanic peaks of the Kona coast, casting long golden shadows across the stark black sand. I walked barefoot along the shoreline, letting the cool, frothy edge of the Pacific Ocean wash over my ankles. The coarse, dark grains of crushed basalt shifted beneath my feet, grounding me in the physical reality of the new day. The air smelled of salt and wild orchids, a clean, sharp scent that cleared the residual tension from my lungs. Aunt Diane walked beside me, holding her sandals in one hand. She wore a simple white linen shirt and a serene, unbothered smile. We did not speak much. We did not need to fill the quiet with frantic planning or defensive strategies. The rhythmic crashing of the tide provided all the necessary sound. My cellular phone rested inside the pocket of my lightweight cardigan. It was turned on. The screen was active, the network connection displayed full bars. Yet it remained entirely silent. For the first time in 32 years, I was not bracing for a manufactured emergency. I was not anticipating a harsh demand for funds or a guilt-ridden text message regarding a sudden utility bill shortfall. By blocking those 3 specific numbers, I had erected a permanent barrier around my peace. The crushing weight of the reliable daughter had been left behind in a Waikiki dining room, and I felt remarkably light. The fallout from that Friday night rippled through the following months with the predictable certainty of basic mathematics. When you remove the primary structural support from a fragile, decaying building, the collapse is swift and unforgiving. Howard and Elaine were forced to endure the profound humiliation they spent their entire lives trying to avoid. The restaurant management did not accept their blustering excuses. Faced with the immediate threat of a police escort and formal charges of defrauding an establishment, my father had to surrender his pride. I learned through the quiet channels of mutual acquaintances that he spent 3 agonizing hours sitting in the restaurant lobby calling predatory short-term lenders and liquidating his meager remaining retirement funds just to settle the staggering dinner tab. The influencer guests Tiffany invited blocked her on all social media platforms by sunrise, treating her financial disaster like a contagious disease. The demise of the luxury swimwear boutique followed shortly after. Without my stolen $25,000 to artificially inflate her operating budget, and without the prospect of my corporate bonus acting as a commercial guarantor, Tiffany was thrust into the unforgiving reality of retail economics. The business withered rapidly. Within 90 days, the commercial lease defaulted, the bank seized the property. The imported Italian marble countertops, the bespoke espresso machine, and the velvet display hangers were auctioned off for fractions of their original cost to satisfy angry creditors. Tiffany was forced to abandon her curated influencer aesthetic and accept a standard, entry-level retail position at a local shopping mall. The fantasy dissolved because the bankroll vanished. Predictably, Howard and Elaine attempted to deploy their final remaining weapon. They tried to control the narrative. They initiated a frantic smear campaign, calling every extended relative, family friend, and distant cousin in their contact list. They spun a tragic fiction, painting themselves as devoted, heartbroken parents who were ruthlessly abandoned by a greedy, wealthy daughter. They claimed I turned my back on my own flesh and blood the second I secured a lucrative patent. 10 years ago, that strategy would have succeeded. I would have been ostracized, whispers following me at every holiday gathering. But they failed to factor in the sheer, devastating power of the live corporate broadcast. The truth of my character was already a matter of public record. The entire state of Hawaii had watched me stand on a brightly lit stage and voluntarily hand a multi-million-dollar royalty trust to a retired school teacher. The extended family had witnessed the raw, unscripted joy on Aunt Diane's face when the conglomerate transferred the generational wealth. My parents' fiction crumbled against the heavy, undeniable weight of that footage. The extended relatives recognized the reality of the situation. I was not a selfish miser hoarding my resources. I was an incredibly generous benefactor who had simply chosen to redirect my assets toward genuine support. Everyone realized I possessed a deep capacity for giving. I just refused to give to Howard, Elaine, and Tiffany ever again. The realization isolated my parents entirely. The family gossips stopped returning their calls. The country club associates distanced themselves from the scandal. My biological parents found themselves stranded on a quiet, lonely island, constructed from their own deceit. Walking along the black sand beach with Diane, I processed the profound shift in my existence. I had spent 3 decades operating under a flawed, fundamental belief. I thought family was defined by biological proximity. I believed that sharing a genetic sequence meant you owed a permanent, unending debt to the people who raised you. I assumed love was a tariff you paid for the privilege of occupying space in their household. The oceanographic work had taught me to observe ecosystems objectively. In nature, a parasitic relationship eventually destroys the host, unless the host detaches. My parents were not a family. They were a localized economy that required my constant depletion to sustain their comfort. Real family does not hand you an invoice for their affection. Real family does not steal the money you earned pushing a lawnmower in the tropical heat to fund a pageant gown for a favored sibling. Real family is the estranged aunt who drives to the store, buys the chemistry set you dreamed of, and tells you to read the instruction manual carefully. Family is the person who looks at your potential and decides to invest in your mind rather than extracting your labor. Diane stopped walking. She turned to face the vast, stretching horizon of the Pacific Ocean. The morning light caught the silver in her hair. She did not need to articulate her gratitude. The quiet, dignified peace radiating from her posture was the only return on investment I ever required. If you are listening to this story and recognizing the rigid, exhausting architecture of your own life, I need you to pause and evaluate your surroundings. If you are the designated workhorse, the quiet problem solver, the one they only call when the checkbook is unbalanced or the foundation is cracking, you must recognize the danger of your position. You have likely spent years telling yourself that keeping the peace is a noble endeavor. You rationalize their harsh words and their convenient memories. You forgive their betrayals because the prospect of setting boundaries feels terrifying and foreign. You carry the heavy tray laden with their expectations, their debts, and their manufactured crises, hoping that one day they will invite you to sit down and enjoy the feast. They will never invite you to sit down. The table was built using your resources, but the chairs are reserved for the people who refuse to carry the weight. I am asking you to open your own emotional ledgers. I want you to perform a ruthless, meticulous audit of your relationships. Track the incoming affection against the outbound labor. Tally the cost of the canceled dreams, the drained savings accounts, and the swallowed pride. Look closely at the receipts hidden in the background of your life. When you discover the glaring, undeniable deficit, do not confront them with tears. Do not beg them to acknowledge your worth. Take the heavy tray you have carried for decades and set it down. Let their false narratives hit the floor and shatter. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep a toxic hierarchy warm. You are allowed to freeze your accounts. You are allowed to sever the communication lines that drain your spirit. You are allowed to redirect your valuable energy toward the people who actually celebrate your existence. The transition will be uncomfortable. They will call you selfish. They will declare you a disgrace. They will attempt to marshal the opinions of strangers to shame you back into submission. Let them speak to the void. Their anger is merely the panic of a parasite realizing the host has moved out of reach. I am 32 years old. My name is Joanne Larson. I am a successful marine biologist, an inventor, and the architect of my own secure, peaceful life. I no longer fix broken appliances in a house where I am unwanted. I no longer subsidize the illusions of people who view me as a walking bank account. I stand on the edge of the ocean, listening to the steady, eternal rhythm of the tide, holding a phone that only rings when someone I cherish is on the other end of the line. The storm of my childhood is permanently over. The accounts are balanced. The ledger is closed, and the horizon in front of me is clear, bright, and entirely mine. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Thank you for listening to the truth hidden behind the 40 missed calls. If this story provided the clarity you needed to audit your own life, please share it with the person in your circle who is still carrying the tray. Claim your space, protect your resources, and remember that true prosperity begins the exact second you stop paying rent on a toxic relationship. Take a deep breath. Step into the light. I will see you in the next story. In the grand, sprawling tapestry of the traditional American family, there is a dangerous, quiet myth we pass down from one generation to the next. It is the myth of the reliable child. We sit in our manicured living rooms, gathered around holiday tables piled high with the fruits of the American dream, and we unconsciously assign roles. There is the shining star, the fragile artist, the boisterous athlete, and then, invariably, there is the load-bearing wall. The story of Joanne Larson is not merely a tale of a brilliant marine biologist outsmarting her predatory relatives. It is a devastating mirror held up to the dark underbelly of how we view parenting, values, family responsibility, and the long-term guidance of children in modern society. Joanne's journey from a dismissed humid warehouse to the glittering stage of a multi-million-dollar ecotech gala forces us to examine the terrifying consequences of what happens when parents mistake a child's quiet competence for an endless exploitable utility. When we look at Howard and Elaine Larson, we do not see monsters lurking in the shadows. We see a terrifyingly common failure of emotional awareness. Traditional family structures in America often place a heavy emphasis on presenting a flawless, cohesive front to the neighborhood, the country club, and the social media timeline. In this pursuit, parents can easily fall into the trap of cultivating the child who shines the brightest. In this case, Tiffany, the curated Waikiki influencer, while simultaneously extracting resources from the child who is sturdy enough to bear the weight. Howard and Elaine failed the most fundamental test of parenting, They did not see their daughters equitably. They viewed Tiffany as a delicate investment requiring constant subsidy, and they viewed Joanne as an appliance, a biological safety net whose sole purpose was to absorb the shock of their extravagant mistakes. True parenting requires a bedrock of absolute honesty and unwavering fairness. These are not just pleasant moral concepts. They are the architectural blueprints of a human being's psychological security. When Howard fabricated a phantom spinal deterioration to extract $25,000 from his daughter, he did not just steal the down payment for her first home. He fundamentally shattered the sacred trust that is supposed to exist between a father and his child. He weaponized Joanne's deep, inherent empathy to fund a commercial lease for her sister's vanity swimwear boutique. This is where the traditional concept of family first becomes dangerously distorted. When family first is used as a smokescreen for financial abuse, it teaches a child that her love is merely a transactional currency. It teaches her that she is not worthy of protection, but is instead expected to be the protector, the financier, and the silent savior, all without ever receiving a single word of gratitude. Long-term guidance for children should be about equipping them to navigate the world with a strong, unshakable sense of self-worth. Aunt Diane understood this. When she bought a 12-year-old Joanne the chemistry set her parents had cast aside for cheerleading fees, Diane was executing the highest form of parental guidance. She invested in Joanne's mind without attaching an invoice to the gift. She recognized that guiding a child means giving them the tools to build their own future, not handing them a shovel to dig their siblings out of debt. This is the profound tragedy of the Larson household, and it resonates deeply within the quiet corners of countless American homes. How many capable, fiercely intelligent daughters are currently sitting in the shadows, quietly paying the emotional and financial rent for families who treat them as secondary citizens? How many women have spent their 20s and 30s swallowing their pride, believing that if they just fix one more broken refrigerator, pay one more delinquent tax bill, or co-sign one more disastrous commercial loan, they will finally earn a seat at the table? If you have ever felt the suffocating weight of being the reliable workhorse, if you have ever watched someone else accept the applause for the love you quietly funded, you are not alone in this profound exhaustion. There is a community of people who understand the exact shape of your invisible burdens. I urge you to follow Zara Told Stories, a space dedicated to giving voice to the quiet ones who finally set down the tray, a channel where the untold narratives of family dynamics and personal liberation are brought out of the dark and into the light. We must collectively unlearn the toxic conditioning that binds us to abusive family systems. There is a pervasive, almost suffocating conventional wisdom in our culture that insists blood is an unbreakable contract. We are told from a very young age that we must honor our parents, forgive every transgression, and keep the peace at all costs because they are the only family you have. We are bombarded with narratives of tearful reconciliations and deathbed pardons, but I offer you a stark, decisive, philosophical counter-narrative. You do not owe your life to the people who gave you life. Loyalty is not a localized economy where you are permanently required to operate at a deficit. Forgiveness is a beautiful concept, but reconciliation is a privilege that must be earned, and sometimes the most profound act of love you can commit is the act of walking away. Abandoning a toxic family structure is not a failure of your morality. It is the ultimate triumph of your self-respect. When Joanne blocked those 40 frantic phone calls on the lanai of that Kona resort, she did not commit an act of cruelty. She executed an act of profound, life-saving boundaries. She proved that you cannot buy a seat at a table that has already decided you are staff, and that true prosperity begins the exact second you stop paying rent on a relationship that is bankrupting your soul. As you sit in your own living room tonight, looking around at the photographs on your walls and the chairs pulled up to your dining table, you must ask yourself a difficult, terrifying question. Look closely at the faces of the people you claim to support and the people who claim to support you. Are you sitting at a table surrounded by family? Or are you sitting at a table surrounded by creditors? And when the music stops and the bill inevitably arrives, who is actually reaching for the check? And who is quietly staring at you, waiting for you to bleed